My focus isn't to reverse this disease. My focus is to say that you are an infinite being and you're experiencing yourself as a human. And as a human being, these are the fundamentals of health and healing. And if a person does this, it will help them heal from disease. It will help them heal from confusion. It'll help them heal in relationships. It'll help them simply recognize their wholeness. That's my goal.
I don't hear a lot of medical professionals talking about that. Could you break down those 4 engines a little bit?
I now have a weekly newsletter where you can receive behind-the-scenes updates about the podcast, sneak peeks into our upcoming guests, along with highlights and inspiring quotes from each episode. Use the link to sign up.
I am here with Anoop Kumar, who had a near-death-like experience. He is also the co-founder and CEO of Health Revolution and frontline emergency physician. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Melissa, for having me on the show.
All right, so let's hear about you. I would love to hear about your near-death-like experience.
Sure. So this is something that happened when I was in medical school, and I had come home for a break, and I was home at my parents' house for a couple days, and I was reading in my room, and while reading, something caught my interest in it. I don't remember exactly what it was, what I was reading, but something caught my interest, and in that moment, it was as if an explosion went off, and the room fell away, everything fell away, and it felt like I was in the midst of this blaze, like this brilliant orange blaze, like this undulating vibrance. And it was me there without a body, just this kind of sense of identity and just kind of basking in the sun, if you will, And that went on for some period of time. For whatever reason, didn't seem strange. It was just very enjoyable. And then it was as if I was then passing through the sun. So I was going to cross over, you could say. That's what it felt like. I was crossing a bridge, going to cross something. And in that moment, I knew that if I went, that there was no coming back, that I would not come back to this lifetime. And the feeling specifically was everything would change forever. That's kind of the feeling of that. And, I think there was a part of me that could not help but go that way. And there was also a part of me, I think, that kind of questioned. I could feel a little bit of both, but definitely the part of me, I could not resist crossing that bridge. I put it that way. And I was just magnetized and being pulled. And then at that moment, this being of light, we could say, emerged from the sun, from this glorious, dazzling, brilliant sun. It's almost like an aspect of that sun came forth and instilled an idea in my mind, which was that this wouldn't be fair, and that there was still something to be done. And there was something in me that knew it was true. There was so many other things in my life at that time. I was getting ready to graduate medical school relatively soon, I think. And then, of course, the rest of my career. And I think I was engaged at the time. And there were many other things happening in my life. And so the truth of that hit home and just gave me pause, And when I paused, all that was remaining to be done, that sprung me back, that it's almost like a spring had been stretched and I was just going to cross and it was going to snap and no coming back. But that pause halted that momentum. And then it's like the rubber band sprang back and everything re-imploded. And there everything was again in the room. And this guy sitting there on the chair as he had been before, but everything had changed at that point. The way the room looked, who I was, what it felt like that I was, what it felt like the world was, and then began a long process.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. It's just incredible to me that you had such a profound experience while just sitting there and suddenly you are out of your body having this intense spiritual experience.
Yeah, it was it was intense. At the time I wouldn't have called it intense. I would say a lot of the things that happened afterwards were intense, integrating the whole thing, which is still happening today. There's an intensity to that. At the moment, I would just say it was brilliant. It was brilliance. It was deep. It was moving. It was powerful. It was those things.
Was there anything in your life leading up to this that triggered the experience, or was it completely spontaneous?
Well, there was a lot in the sense that I was steeped in a spiritual and philosophical tradition growing up, the tradition of Advaita, of non-duality. And my parents were heavily involved in that. And I was too. I found it very meaningful. So as a kid, I was always exploring these things, and I was doing meditation and trying to play with my mind, and then trying to reconcile that with school, which in contrast seemed rather shallow, the things that we were learning in school compared to this knowledge of who we are and things like that. So that experimental stage was always there, and there was this restlessness in me that was rather dissatisfied with the world, which I think honestly is common for a lot of kids, in the sense that the narratives of our society and the expectations of kids, I think, are extremely narrow overall. And what we allow kids to experience, that they can naturally experience, are pretty narrow. So that was there. But certainly in that moment, I did not expect anything to happen. I wasn't trying to make something happen. I wasn't meditating or anything in that moment. I think it was just the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, or the wood had finally become dry enough that it just took the slightest bit of spark and the whole thing just lit a flame.
Wow, fascinating. So you mentioned that you were raised with Advaita Vedanta teachings, and I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone personally with that background, being raised in that from the time that you were a child. I would love to hear a little bit more about what you were taught.
So Advaita essentially means not two. Advaita is two, or duality, and Advaita is not two. And it essentially says that underlying the multiplicity of this world, multiplicity meaning simply you, me as individuals, the screen in front of us, the tree outside, the clouds, the infinite things, the infinite number of things that we can name in this world, including our own thoughts, our feelings, our identities, our roles, space, time, past, present, future, all of these multiplicities, underlying this is an essential reality that is indivisible. Not different than in a dream, all the characters, all the space and time and events that happen in a dream, good, bad, friend, foe, are all representations of that one consciousness that represents as a dream. Similarly, this world, which is another state of consciousness, just as a dream is a state of consciousness, is also a representation of something more fundamental. This is the hypothesis that is posed by Advaita, and one goes through contemplative practices to experiment and see whether they can see if this is true or not for them.
And that's fascinating. So, what you saw in your near death like experience, did it back up those teachings?
Ultimately, yes, as I thought about it, as it happened and in the immediate aftermath, I wasn't thinking. There was no real thought involved. It was just experiencing that raw experience. And later, when the thoughts came back online, everything started to fall into place. Everything that I had heard started to make sense from direct experience, as opposed to, just hearing and hypothesizing and testing. So yes, it has everything I've experienced is in line with the things that I have heard. And that is really talked about in many philosophies across cultures.
Right. So, when you came back from the experience, you mentioned that everything was different. How you saw the room was different, and how you saw yourself, and how you understood the world. Could you break that down a little bit for us?
So before, I had experienced myself pretty much as this creature, this body, this mind, these thoughts, And then in meditative states, or at times, I would experience expansion or depth, and all children experience this before they are taught to forget, as they grow up. So I still had access to that aspect of myself and a little bit of the feel, but this really broke everything open, where it was crystal clear that what I was not just this body and this character and this lifetime, but extend far beyond this. That became obvious. It was almost like I was not looking through the eyes anymore, whereas before it seemed to be looking through the eyes, but now the eyes were seen rather than the eyes were doing the seeing. And even the room, the idea that space is contained within walls, that crashed and burned because it was very obvious that the walls themselves are made of space or made of a kind of light. And it is this light that interpreted through the mind that gives a representation of dimensionality, 3D, 4D, whatever dimensions we talk about, is this essential light that refracts like a prism and creates this kind of stage. And we get the experience of space where we don't perceive the density of that. And then where we perceive density is objects and walls and things like that. So all of this kind of became a crystal clear vision. And that was radically different. And I remember this guy, it felt like this guy because it wasn't it wasn't clear that this was me, but it felt like this guy was sitting there on this chair and looking around and noticing that perception was totally different, that it wasn't just localized behind the eyes. And then I remember getting up and going to the bathroom and looking in the mirror and just almost like getting to know who is this? Who is this person or what is this person in the mirror? And why do they look so happy or so peaceful? Because apparently before that I was very restless, which I didn't even really recognize, but that face was just so peaceful that it was unrecognizable. So this was a process of re-seeing, re-knowing, re-understanding who I am, what this world is, what are the relationships among these, and then eventually, how do I want to function here? What do I want to do?
Wow, that's amazing. Are you familiar with A Course in Miracles?
I've heard of it and I've read a few pages. It's a book, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's a channeled text, but it
Yeah.
describes something like similar to what you're saying. It calls it vision when you can see the light behind objects. And I've never personally experienced it, but I've been fascinated by it. So, was this like a temporary ability or I don't know, vision that came to you, or are you still able to see in that way?
Yeah, initially it was after, after let's say coming back, we could say, and getting into the world, it it was waxing and waning for a
Mhm.
while. And I was trying to experiment and see what this is and how does it work and switching back and forth between this kind of individual local identity and this non-local expanse and seeing how that goes. And eventually that stabilized. So it's not a constant thing that's all the time. It's still, it's like waves. There's still fluctuations in the experience, but that way of seeing from before is gone, and that way of thinking especially was strong for me because I was considered a smart person. And so the way I would think in certain ways, got me through exams and a lot of these kinds of tests and those things. But my thinking totally changed in that for the most part, it wasn't there. That was a big change. And when it was there, it was highly efficient and specific. So what needed to be thought of, the thought would come and almost like a pointer, and then something else, and then I could create a step ladder of a pattern, which is how I communicate now. That's how I write and how I speak. It's kind of what needs to be said. It's highly efficient and specific. Whereas before there would be a lot of figuring out things and maybe meandering and those kinds of things. So those were two big changes, and that's never come back. And I'm pretty happy with that.
Wow. Some people spend years in meditation to try to learn and achieve that state of mind.
Yeah, and that too is a kind of rubber band in that in meditation, that mind can be expanded and expanded. It's almost like this balloon, right?
Mhm.
And and there is this kind of pop that has to happen. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be a very silent, maybe not silent, but can be a very subtle pop. It's just like a shift, or it can be a dramatic pop. As long as that kind of shift doesn't happen, what happens is it'll re-implode, right? So in meditation, it's expansive, and then getting up and walking the dog, or going to work or doing something, then it narrows a little bit more, right?
Mhm.
Even now, yeah, it's not constant. There's fluctuation, but something else has opened up that there's a certain threshold beyond which it cannot go back.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, is there anything else in your near death like experience that you were shown about the nature of reality?
When I retell it, I feel like I can tell the whole story in about 30
Mhm.
seconds or 60 seconds. But
Mhm.
what I can't tell is the depth of what happened. I don't know how long that was actually, that the experience lasted. I don't really have a sense of time for that day. But a lot of it, I feel like over 99.99% of it was in silence. It was just like absorption. And it's almost like, I almost feel like, if you take a really thick plush towel and you put it into the ocean, it's gonna suck up everything, and it's gonna be completely soaked, super saturated, right? That's kind of what it was like. There wasn't really anything to say. It was just sucking everything in and soaking in that, and then, coming back to this world, and then, seeing what to do with this in this world. So I guess the shorter answer is no. In that moment, there was nothing that I was shown or saw, but it's almost as if, like, once I came back, everything, like, the depth of that moment started unfolding in the time of this world, day by day, month by month, and year after year. It keeps happening.
You mentioned that it took a lot of work to integrate this experience. Could you share with us about that process?
Yeah, especially after I graduated medical school and started my training in emergency medicine. We were at a very busy hospital with lots of very sick people, lots of trauma. And I guess in some sense, I didn't realize all the things that had changed within me. It's like, if a lot of things change with you and people kind of leave you alone, maybe it doesn't really show that much. But then, like, once you have to do things and you're in the thick of things, like, that might show up. I feel like it was kind of like that. So here I was in the hospital, and, you know, people with heart attacks and strokes and stab wounds and gunshot wounds, and all this is happening. And I have to do certain things. But now all of a sudden I realize I'm 1,000 times more sensitive than I was, or my ability to, like, have any kind of shield like I may have had for, growing up or for many years, that was not there. So I was feeling everything. I'm sensing everything. My relationship with the body was tenuous. So sometimes I was in it, sometimes I wasn't. My relationship with dimensions were tenuous, like where I was exactly at any given time. And I didn't have a lot of skill. I didn't know how to navigate these things, right? The only thing I knew is that this is kind of part of what happens. This can happen, and it's not bad. I knew that. In fact, I also knew that it's one of the best things that can happen to a human being. I just knew that from growing up and from being around other people, that this was a really important experience. So ultimately, I had to do trial and error and figure out how to stabilize in this new frequency, how to, otherwise I would have had to just leave society, which is what many people do. They become monks, or they become, they do all kinds of things because the stimulus and the noise, the signal to noise ratio is so low, right? The noise is so much greater than the signal in this society that it's too much for that kind of sensitivity. So I had to go through trial and error. And that's where the four engines came from, which we now teach in our 28-day jumpstart course: nutrition, movement, connection, and rest. That's what I stumbled upon as fundamental to stabilizing in a new level of living. So that was really my trial and error process. And frankly, that goes on now. I'm always stabilizing. I'm always balancing, because I'm making a choice to neither leave the society nor live in this society on this society's terms. Neither are acceptable for me. So I want to be here, but I also want to say something and show something different. And for me to be able to do that requires an ongoing practice.
Wow, I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people right now, just with everything that's going on in the world and people realizing that so much of the way our society is structured is not necessarily in our best interest or in the way that a free society should be set up or with our health in mind at all either, which leads into my next question. Because in your bio, you mentioned that because you work in the healthcare system, so you came back from this experience and realized that our current system doesn't really know what health truly means and began to integrate a deeper understanding of consciousness with existing medical knowledge. I would really love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was actually one night during my training in Philadelphia. It was a especially busy night. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, I remember a nurse running into the trauma bay, the resuscitation bay with a baby that wasn't breathing. And everybody gathered around and we all do what we do to help this baby. And it was sometime around then, it felt like somebody just pressed pause on everything, right? And so this this kind of cacophony of sounds, all the sights, the colors, the movements, all of it, it's almost just went like zoop, pause. And this idea came into my mind that we have no idea what health is. Because it was like I saw us trying to do so much. You know, the person with heart failure, the person with the stroke, the person was with a life-threatening infection, and we were doing all of these things. But did we know what our destination was? Do we really know where we're going, or are we just doing what we know how to do? Right? Are we just like following the habits that our society has taught us? Helping people, no doubt we're helping people, but what is that destination we're taking them to other than, you know, trying to rewind time a day or 2 days or 3 days or a month or two? And that's when it struck me when I saw all of this, that I was like, we don't really know where we're going. We're just going and going and going. And, this paralleled my own experience and what I was talking about, my own balancing that I have to do, and these four engines of nutrition, movement, connection, and rest. And what I found is that when I do these things, it helps with this tremendously. And what I also found later, as I started interviewing people who have healed from all kinds of diseases, is that they're doing the same things. So basically, like, these are the fundamental engines. And if you look back at Chinese medicine, if you look at Ayurveda, if you look at these systems that are millennia old, they're talking about the same things. If you look at a monk in the Himalayas, they're pretty much doing the same things, right? So these are the things that are fundamental to human sustenance, to human development, to human growth. And when I saw that, I said, how do we do this? Because it gets phrased in this nebulous term, wellness. Oh, it's just wellness. Or lifestyle. It's just lifestyle. Or it's prevention. It's just prevention. And I'm saying, no, it's not. It's prevention, it's treatment, it's well-being, it's performance, it's spiritual insight. It's actually everything. It's actually that silver bullet that everybody is looking for and that companies want to manufacture as a pill. But it's actually much more free. It's much more readily available than that, with many fewer side effects than that. And so when I saw this, I saw there was a clear connection between this practice, nutrition, movement, connection, and rest, activating these engines, and our consciousness. Because as a person starts to activate these engines, their body starts to heal, their mind starts to heal, they start to become clear, their sense of purpose comes out, and they start to go beyond the societal narratives about who we are and what this world is.
Could you break down those four engines a little bit? I really would love to dive into those. So, nutrition is the first one.
Yes, nutrition is the first one, and specifically nutrition of the mind is first.
Mhm.
Right? So we talk about food all the time, but even before that is nutrition of the mind, which is what you're doing with this podcast, right? Which is what we're doing with this conversation. It's just a nourishing conversation. right? We're not focusing completely on pain and how things don't work and the problems, right? There's a time to talk about those, but there's also a time to talk about what are the solutions? What is true about you and me? For everybody listening to this, what is actually true about you? Who are you? Who are you beyond just the mind that is listening to this? Where does that mind come from? Does it really come from the brain, right? When did you begin? Is there such a thing as an end? What is the nature of this world? If you look beyond these things around us, which we've been told are made up of tiny little particles. Remember those molecular model kits that we played with? These tiny little protons,
Yeah.
neutrons, electrons, those little balls. Well, now we know those balls are vibrating patterns and infinite fields of energy. What does that mean about what this world is and how does it relate to who we are? This is nourishment, and these are questions that everybody has beneath the surface. Right? Maybe we're not encouraged to ask them, but beneath the surface, everybody has these because all kids live in that space of wonder until if we're trained not to, right? So that is a key piece of this nourishment of the mind. Then, of course, nourishment of the body. And number one, the easiest thing is cutting out processed foods, which is so critical. There's some people who argue for this kind of food, that kind of food, but nobody argues that you should eat a lot of processed foods, right? So
Right.
we can all agree on that. Cut out the processed foods and eat plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables, right? That's nutrition. If we did that, pretty much half the diseases would go away, literally. So that's
Right.
nutrition. Then movement.
Mhm.
Movement, of course, exercise, right? Moving the body, getting the blood flowing, getting the breathing going. This is critical. And now there are new studies that suggest that, it doesn't even have to be an hour several times a week. Sometimes as little as 15 minutes a few times a week can make a difference, as long as there's a lot of, change in acceleration, meaning changing in directions that keep the blood flowing and that use the large muscle groups. Right. So we know about that exercise, but movement doesn't have to be exercise. There are a lot of people who said, you know what? That's that's not for me. I don't want to exercise. Well, you can still move the body, range of motion, like every digit that you have, even this tiny one, what we call the distal PIP of this index finger, even that, because ultimately we are representations of our consciousness. So moving the body in every way that it can move is actually flexing the mind. It's stretching the mind. It's expanding the mind. So that's range of motion, exercise, range of motion, moving our emotions. How many stories I could tell you of people that we've interviewed that had suppressed emotions from childhood, moved those, and things like Crohn's disease goes away, ulcerative colitis goes away, so many things. Because ultimately, as we said, the physical structure is representational. It's not that the physical creates the mental, it's the other way around, that we are subtle beings. And this subtlety in dense form is what we represent as the body. So this is movement of the emotions, movement of creativity. What do you love to do? What do you have to say? Right? It's important. Like, what does Melissa have to say? What does this person have to say? What does every single person listening to this? What do you have to say? What is on your mind? What do you know? Because each of us is connected with this deep intelligence. Every single person. There's no such thing as an unintelligent person. We might make choices that are unintelligent, but fundamentally, nobody is unintelligent, whether we can capture it on an exam or not. So, what is it that a person has to say? What do you have to say? Movement of the breath, right? Fully breathing. We know that shallow, fast breathing is anxious, deep, full breathing is stable, right? So, look at how powerful movement is. Often we talk about exercise, but movement is so much more than just exercise. Yes, exercise, but range of motion, moving our emotions, moving our creativity, moving the breath. Again, if a person just does that, they are going to transform. Right? Your family's not going to recognize you. If you do all those for 2 weeks, they'll be like, who is this person? They're going to change so radically. So that's nutrition, movement. Now we come to connection, the third engine to activate. Connection, number one, connecting with oneself, asking the deep questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is this world? And it's not about having an answer. It's about living with the question. It's about being okay with the question. It's about honoring the question. Right? When we honor these questions, we honor our own potential because our own potential is the answer to these questions. And making space for that honor is so critical. So connecting with oneself, mindfulness practice, meditation, all of these, connecting with oneself, then connecting with others. right? So we go within ourselves, we reach this deeper place, this open place, and we include people in that. So who else wants to be part of this conversation, right? Who are we in relationship with that we can kind of try this with, right? That we can struggle with, that we can play with, that we can experience with, that we can experiment with, right? So connecting with others. And then one of my favorites, connecting with the planet, one of the most overlooked things. And I think if there's such a thing as a biohack, I think it's the greatest biohack in the world. You can plug into the world's greatest technology. There's no greater technology than nature. That reminds me of AI. Everybody's so enamored of AI, but they forget that we created it. NI,
Right.
natural intelligence. We created AI. AI did not create us. So let's not forget this immense technology that we are. So how do you plug in to connecting with the planet? Just like you plug in your charger, what does your charger do? It connects with that electricity, direct physical connection. Similarly, your feet in the soil, so there can be electron flow, electron transfer, right? Sunlight on your skin, fresh air in your lungs, and eyes up on the sky. Eyes contacting the sky are so important. It reminds us of that vastness and that unity. There's a technology there. So this is connection, connecting with oneself, connecting with others, connecting with nature or the planet. And finally, rest. Rest includes sleeping, of course, sleeping, aligning our circadian rhythm, and then also resting while awake. How do we rest while awake? How do we rest in a conversation? How can you be active? How can you be energetic and still be restful? Right? That's also a skill that we can develop. So these are the 4 engines that we teach in our course: nutrition, movement, connection, and rest. And you can imagine that anybody who does 10%, 20% of this for a couple weeks, few weeks, will be transformed. And everybody has access to this technology.
Wow. That is brilliant, in my opinion, how you just organize everything. You cover literally everything, including quantum health or circadian biology principles of connecting to nature, which
Yeah.
I don't hear a lot of medical professionals talking about that, but
Yeah.
that was huge in transforming my health last year.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, there is no more powerful technology on the planet than if you
Mhm.
plug into nature. You are accessing the intelligence from which we come as individuals, and it knows how to heal.
Wow. So I'm assuming that you have probably walked a lot of people through this program and through these principles at this point. Have you seen some pretty big success stories with people being able to reverse disease?
Yes, so we don't sell it as a disease reversal program. What we say is that these are the principles of health and healing, because my focus isn't to reverse this disease or to reverse that disease. My focus is to say that you are an infinite being and you're experiencing yourself as a human. And as a human being, these are the fundamentals of health and healing. And if a person does this, it will help them heal from disease. It will help them heal from confusion. It'll help them heal in relationships. It'll help them simply recognize their wholeness. That's my goal, right? So, and we get those comments all the time. I see myself in a new way. My health has improved so much. I have so much more clarity. I have so much more energy. I can cut down on my medicine. We see those kinds of comments all the time. And it has to happen because you're simply aligning with that natural intelligence.
Right. Well, Anoop, I would love to have you share a little bit more about your program, where people can find it, and anything else you want to share about it.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's a 28-day jumpstart program, and it's separated into 4 weeks, and each week focuses on one of the engines. So week 1 is nutrition. And so that includes talking about nutrition of the mind. It includes talking about plant-based food and different aspects of how to prepare recipes, videos on how to do that, challenges for the day that a person can do. All that is in nutrition week 1. Week 2 is movement, all the things we talked about, and then connection and rest. These are the 4 weeks. The way it works is that you get a video to watch that's about 5 to 10 minutes. That's a bite-sized summary and information for the day, and then you have a practice for the day. So this is designed for people. You don't have to take a month off of work to do it, but it's designed to integrate into your life. So you spend a few minutes a day learning something and practicing something. Next day, the same thing. And you go through this bite-sized steps. And at the end of 28 days, even if you haven't done half the stuff, if you just do 5 to 10 things of those practices over and over, there's no doubt you will see a change in your life. And so what we recommend people to do is to go through it over 28 days. Some people like to binge and they do it all in a week or in 2 weeks. It's a lot of change to assimilate in that time. But if you can take it step by step over the course of a month, you will see a change. And you can access that at healthrevolution.org/28 days.
Thank you so much. I will have the link in the description. And are there any final words that you would like to say?
I would say that you're here for a reason, and there's much more to you than most of the narratives we are told. And there's nothing wrong with any of us. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the person you like and you don't like also. We're all here having a certain kind of experience, and we're all here to learn who we are and what this world is, and take those experiences with us as we move forward.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being willing to share your story.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.